Welcome boys and girls. Today we're going to be talking about some advanced waltz thinking. We're going to break the steps down into a few more beats and we're going to add some complex rise and fall techniques to it as well. Let's have a look and see how it all works. So for today's session, we're going to be talking particularly about the modern waltz. So our slow waltz of about 30 bars per minute, and of course the 1, 2, 3 beats per bar. Now, some of these aspects of the rise and fall and timing nuances will apply to other dances, but of course with other dancing rhythms, they have their own particular tweaks as well. So we're just talking about waltz today. The first thing that we want to get used to thinking about with our modern waltz is instead of counting at 1, 2, 3, we want to start counting 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now we want to make sure that as we double those counts, we don't double the speed. So we're not trying to make it a Viennese, we're not trying to dance 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and speed it up. But what we are doing is breaking each of those beats into halves so we can start to examine them a little bit more. Now, the first thing when we're talking about this style of counting is, of course, making sure that we're always counting in the same way. It's very easy to get our ands and our numbers a little bit confused sometimes, particularly at the start of a bar. If we're starting with 2 half beats, it's very easy to go and 1 rather than 1 and. But when we're talking about these and beats, particularly for rise and fall in the discussion today, we want the and to be the half beat after the number. So we want to count 1 and, 2 and, 3 and in that way we are consistent. So now that we've got our newfound 6 half-beat way of thinking, let's see how it applies to some of our basic waltz movements with a focus on the rise and fall. So let's take a basic figure that I'm sure you all know and start to apply this more advanced technique of thinking. We're going to dance a left foot change. Now, this of course is a forward figure for the gentlemen and a backward figure for the ladies, but these techniques apply whenever the person is coming forward. So ladies, when it's your turn to move forward, you will apply the same techniques. And indeed, if we're following the gents in the same way, you will be nearly forced into these techniques if he has good technique on his side of things. So let's have a look at the first 2 half beats, our newfound 1 and. Well, first of all, we're going to get out of this thinking that we have to have our foot planted on the number. We don't want to be counting our waltz 1. That gets us a little bit too ploddy. We want to actually get some grace and some flow and think of a beat as having a duration. So as long as you are stepping within that beat, you are not out of time. This is where the ands come in, because you can be stepping and placing the foot on the and not out of time. So what we're going to do is compress on 1. We're really going to load the legs. We're going to have weight on our supporting leg, less weight on our travelling leg or to-be travelling leg. We're going to compress on 1, and now I'm ready to move. I can get into the floor on the and. So instead of waltzing along 1, I am going to compress 1 and travel on the and. And in this way, we can then start to rise at the end of 1, but we've actually stayed flat through the 1 and then the and after it. 1 and. 1 and. You may have noticed during those demonstrations then that at the end of the and beat, the trailing foot, which will become the next moving foot, was actually contracting under my body. We want to ensure that when we break down our counts, even if we have these 6 half counts, that we're not dancing them too staccato. We do still want to maintain a flow between each half. But by creating each half, we're giving ourselves more points that we can aim for to make it easier to hit those things in between the actual beats of the dance. So that covers the first 2 half beats, 1 and. Now for anyone that's danced any waltz before, you will know that we've told you to stretch and elongate that second step. Okay, well, you may even know to steal a little bit of time from beat 3. So you may count your waltz 1, 2, 3. What we can start to appreciate now is that we're going to take 3 half beats to take the second step. So if we are counting 1 and 2 and 3 and, we've just performed the 1 and the next step we're going to use 2 and 3, and only hitting the peak of our rise on 3, not at the end of the and of 2. 1 and 2 and 3. So you will notice over those next 3 half beats that I have taken all of the rise from my waltz step. I'm only hitting the peak of my rise as I hit 3 and not at the end of 2. I've finished that third half beat on toes at the full extent of my rise, which leaves us 1 half beat to close our feet and start to come back down to the ground. So the only thing that's left to do to complete this basic figure is to close our feet. Now that's actually not a challenge at the end of that 5th half beat. So because all we have to do is close our feet and lower our heels, we give it the least amount of time. So this is the short 3 of the 1, 2, 3 type counting, whereas we're actually dancing 1 and 2 and 3 and coming together and lowering on and. Now, to fully appreciate what we're doing on the and of the 3, it brings us full circle back to the next 1. And remember, 1 was a compression, not a placement or a movement of the foot. So often we think of lowering and getting ready for that step as having to happen in 3 before the next figure, whereas actually we're going to lower and compress in the 1 of the next figure and step on the and. And in this way we don't have to rush through the close, heels down and compress. We can actually take our time and maintain that grace and not feel like we're dancing very rigidly on every beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and. And you will notice here, I have closed my feet, I have lowered my heels, but I have not yet compressed my body. I'm waiting for the 1 of the next bar to compress and then move forward into the next figure. So far we've focused really on the forward portion, whoever is coming forward into these basic sorts of steps. But what about what happens when you go backward? Well, the general rules are the same. One important thing to note though is if the person going forward ends on a flat foot, then the person going backward should end on a flat foot as well. So if we take the left foot change example that we've been going through, if the followers are going back on their right through the gentleman's compression step of the 1 and the and, the ladies should end up backwards with a heel down on the right foot and having released the toe of the left into the 2 and the rising steps over the next few half beats. 1 and. So that's the rise and fall for a very basic figure, using those 6 half beats as a guide. Now, of course, we want to make sure that just as we're not dancing 3 whole beats, we don't want to be dancing 6 half beats. So these do all flow into one another, but it does help adjust where the goalposts are so you can get that flow and that extension and that rise and fall happening with a bit more beauty and grace and making it feeling good. Now, of course, we often talk about rise and fall and forget the fall. I think basically because we say rise and then everything after that we just forget. But the difference between rise and fall is the difference between the low of the fall and the peak of the rise, which means just as going up and into those toes of the toe steps is important, coming down and compressing through the knees is equally as important. Now there is a limit to how far you can go up. So to make sure that we maximize that difference, we want to be getting good compression and good control, putting your power through those engaging muscles like your quads and your glutes, and keeping your frame nice and tall and upright and compressed with your partner, so that when we rise up, we get a nice difference between our trough and our peak without trying to really go onto some sort of ballet point that just becomes unbalanced and really you just can't finish it. Now, of course, this is a very standard basic rise and fall pattern, but appreciating that we have 6 half beats really does help break down the rise and fall in other patterns as well. If we're dancing through our foot changes forward and backward and the basic moves similar to a natural or a reverse turn, then this rise and fall pattern will be pretty consistent throughout all of those figures. But of course, as soon as we hit more complicated figures, then we need to either stay down and compress more, or we may rise earlier or more sharply. So it will adapt depending on the figure that you are dancing. But hopefully if we apply these half-beat principles, that will help digest and dissolve those more complicated figures and help demystify the rise and fall through them. Now guys, when you're practicing this at home, it really is nice to really slow down and aim for that control. Now, a few things to look out for when you are putting this into practice. You don't want to be feeling it too much in your smaller muscles. Your smaller muscles, particularly around the bottom of your calves, etc., they are your stabilizing muscles, and we don't want them to be being overworked. So you want to be feeling this almost like an exercise in load bearing. You want to be feeling it in your big muscles. You want to be feeling it in your glutes, in your quadriceps, and you want to be holding yourself upright in your frame. Whether you're the lead or the follow, forwards or backwards, it doesn't matter. So if you are feeling it in those smaller muscles, double check your technique, double check the size of your gait, and move through and try and adjust your posture and your frame so that you keep the load bearing in the load bearing muscles, not in those smaller stabilizing muscles. Now, one exercise that you can do if you're game is to actually find a Viennese waltz piece to practice this too. Now, I started the video by saying we don't want to turn our normal modern waltz into a Viennese waltz, but because the Viennese waltz often has a 1 and a 2 and a type pattern, or a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 type pattern, you can start to get 6 beats at Viennese time and use each beat as a half beat for your modern waltz. Now, that can help you to really have a nice beated out way of applying this without having to count the half beats in your modern waltz timing. So give it a go and see if it works for you. It doesn't for everyone, but it's a good exercise to try. Well, everybody, that's it from us today. Try that out. It will take a little bit of time to get used to counting in halves and applying that rise and fall technique over those 6 half beats rather than 3 whole beats. And as we've said, if you're dancing a figure that doesn't have that particular pattern, it will change again. But hopefully this will get you started. As we go through with more videos of this particular type, we will start to examine the rise and fall and the half beats over those particular figures with that figure in mind. But this is a nice one to get you started with any particular figure, and certainly the basics of your waltz. Give it a try whether you're at home or the next time you're on the floor, and good luck.